Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. First things first, I'm letting you guys choose me a new avatar. The poll for the final decision will be linked in the description box and in a pinned comment, assuming future me remembers to do that. I really do appreciate all the wonderful art that was sent in. It really means a lot to me that so many of you took time out of your lives to create something special. Some have suggested that I keep rotating through them as I have been for the last couple of weeks, and as much as I would love to do that, I feel it would be better to have a single avatar for the long run. Now the poll will be open until Thursday, November 7th, and I will announce the winner in next Friday's video. But anyways, on to business. Deconverted Man has asked for my assistance in debunking this video from Inspired Walk, where they cherry-pick some of Richard Dawkins' statements about DNA to try and make it look like DNA is proof that we're intelligently designed. Deconverted Man even got some other YouTubers in to do a few facepalms over the original video, which I thought was a nice touch. I'll leave a link to his copy of the video and the other YouTubers involved in the description, but for now, let's just see what Inspired Walk has to say. Now, they do start their video with just under 2 minutes of Richard Dawkins waxing poetic about the structure of DNA, which I will leave in and let you watch for context. Let's go!
In biology, I suppose it would have to be the double helix, the Watson and Crick discovery of the structure of DNA, which was far more than just the discovery, the crystallographic work, discovering the structure of a big molecule. Because what that led up to was a major revolution in which much of biology became a sort of branch of information technology. The consequence of the Watson-Crick discovery, with all that it led on to, the DNA code and the sort of various genome projects that are going on now, is that genes, which from my point of view are absolutely central to biology, genes are information. They are coded information. It even looks like computer information. I mean, a chromosome is a great long computer tape. It's linear, it runs with one-dimensional digital code. It's not binary, it's quaternary, but apart from that, it's just the same as computer tape. It's read in sequence. It's copied and pasted from one part of the organism to another in just the same way as a computer programmer would copy and paste.
Imagine if you told Bill Gates that his Windows operating system could create itself into a digital information format, and then after that it would manufacture a case for itself and then assemble its own hard drive, build its own motherboard, and install its own application software.
Yeah, but that's the problem with analogies. They are always flawed in some way or other. In this case, the main problem is that you just can't have software without the physical components of a computer, so there would be no way for an operating system to do all that. The operating system needs the rest of it to work. DNA, on the other hand, has very minimal requirements for existence. All it really needs is protection by a simple cell membrane. Phospholipids, when placed in water, naturally and spontaneously form a bilayer which provides an excellent place for DNA to survive, though the original cells were probably RNA rather than DNA. The other problem with this analogy is that DNA is self-replicating. It makes copies of itself, and these copies are imperfect. Computer software does not copy itself by itself, and as such there's not really a chance for it to evolve. On top of that, computer programs wouldn't be able to evolve faster than developers build newer and better programs. So any spontaneous evolution that might be happening in the computer world is outstripped by the guided evolution of software updates. Since DNA does not have a team of developers maintaining and updating it, it has had a chance to go through the rigors of natural selection, which over billions of years has resulted in the biodiversity we see today. Also, keep in mind that gene expression doesn't exist in the computer world. There is no program that is responsible for how the case of the computer looks, or which brand of motherboard it has, or how many watts the power supply is. Our physical bodies are a direct result of gene expression, which is defined as the process by which information from a gene is used in the synthesis of a functional gene product. In other words, there is a gene in your DNA that controls your eye color, your hair color, how tall you are, how many bones you have, where those bones grow, and every other physical characteristic you have. So as much as DNA might resemble computer code, it has much more control over its physical environment than the computer code does. And as such, it can't really be compared from the perspective of the evolution of our bodies.
Or without an intelligent source involved in the entire process.
Well, I don't have as much of a problem with theistic evolutionists as I do with creationists. I mean, if you want to say that God made abiogenesis happen and then evolution took it from there, be my guest. But to say that computers were made by intelligent beings, therefore evolution didn't happen, is a false equivalency at best.
It would be ridiculous.
Yes, it would. It would be almost as ridiculous as saying that we are too complex to have not been designed, therefore an infinitely more complex designer must exist, but this designer was not too complex to have been designed.
Right? Dr. Andrew Flew was a leading spokesman for atheism. However, scientific discoveries about DNA brought him to the conclusion that life and the universe was created by an intelligent designer.
So a philosopher with no scientific background was convinced by something that he didn't understand. Therefore, when thousands of scientists who study DNA for their careers say abiogenesis is entirely plausible, they must be wrong? Seems legit.
And so Dr. Flew no longer became an atheist, but he became a creationist.
No, he became a deist. There is a huge difference between creationism and deism. Now, you could say that he became a creationist in the sense that he believed that everything was created at some point, but the word creationist is associated with a very specific belief system that Flew just never accepted. So you're being more than a bit dishonest here. But hey, creationism wouldn't survive long if creationists were honest, so I get it.
Because of the findings of genetic information in DNA. The DNA code is known as the instruction book for life. DNA is a language and information storage system.
Where does DNA store language? Yes, it does store information, but language is a learned behavior. Unless you mean language in the sense that we would say a program was coded in a certain programming language, but even that doesn't really work, because a programming language was designed so that human beings who understand written language much easier than they can understand groupings of ones and zeros would be able to code more efficiently and effectively. Programming languages are basically a bridge between human minds and computer processors. The ones and zeros themselves aren't really a language, it's more of a set of instructions. When a transistor is on, it's a 1. When it's off, it's a 0. When they are on and off in certain patterns, certain things happen. This is grossly oversimplified to the point where any computer programmers or engineers in the audience probably want to smack me right now, but my point is that computers don't operate on language. They operate on physical reactions to physical processes. It's the same way with DNA. It's not a language. It is a physical reaction to a physical process.
Therefore, just like a software program was designed by an intelligent designer, it makes sense that the DNA code, which is far more complex, was designed by someone who is far more super intelligent than any human being.
How does that make sense? I mean, humans took advantage of how physics worked to make computers. That doesn't automatically mean that organic molecules couldn't have evolved to this level of complexity on their own. And besides, if a programmer coded something with as much garbage code in it as our DNA has, they would be fired. Imagine a programmer writing a Hello World program, but instead of the normal print Hello World, that would be the only line of code necessary, there were also pages and pages of code that use tons of resources but end up doing nothing to affect the outcome of the program. It still just displays Hello World, but it takes a lot more of the computer's processing power to do it than is necessary. Why would an intelligent programmer choose to write their program this way when you could simplify it down to just one line of code? This is what our DNA is like, and depending on who you ask, anywhere from 75 to 98% of our DNA is complete junk, accomplishing absolutely nothing. This is exactly what you would expect from a process like evolution. But if it were intelligently designed, you would expect there to be no junk at all, and for the coding DNA to actually do its job properly, which it doesn't a good chunk of the time. If it did, we wouldn't have things like Down syndrome, cleft palates, people born with missing or extra fingers, or basically any genetic disorder you can think of. There are so many bugs in the program of our genetic code that there is no way it could have passed any sort of quality control. It wouldn't have even made it to beta testing.
It's also important to note that all types of codes and all types of languages are designed or created by a conscious mind.
Yes, but as I pointed out, the genetic code is not like computer programming language. It's closer to machine language, which isn't really a language so much as the laws of physics in action. We didn't design the laws of physics that computers operate on, just as DNA did not design the laws of physics that allow it to operate. Just because something takes advantage of the laws of physics does not mean that it was created by some great intelligence.
Examples of symbolic codes can be music symbols, binary code, or blueprints. Examples of languages can be HTML, C++, hieroglyphics, Hebrew, or the English language.
That's nice. What's your point?
Therefore, all instructions, all languages, all symbols, and all codes are information which originate from a conscious and intelligent source.
Wait, was your argument there really just, hey, I can think of a bunch of languages and symbolic systems, therefore everything that could be metaphorically compared to them must be designed by an intelligence? Really?
It would make sense then to conclude that DNA comes from an intelligent source.
So DNA is way too complex to have arisen naturally. Therefore, it needed something to design it. But this something has to be less complex than DNA, otherwise it would also have had to have been designed, because anything as complex or more complex than DNA could not possibly exist without a creator. So is God less complex than DNA, or was God created by something that is less complex than DNA?
The DNA code did not just create itself, but it proves a super intelligent designer.
So the designer is super intelligent. So that implies that the designer is more complex than DNA, which means that there must have been a super intelligent designer to design the super intelligent designer, because there's no way something as complex as a super intelligent designer could create itself. Do you see the problem here?
In this case, God. Even Richard Dawkins, who is a well-known atheist, has admitted to the possibilities of intelligent design.
I have a feeling we're about to see a clip of his interview with Ben Stein from that Expelled movie. You know, the one where they had to lie to scientists about the premise of their movie in order to get the interviews in the first place?
And he stated himself that genes are coded information and that genes even look like computer information.
If you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology, you might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Let's watch that again, but this time in better context.
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto. perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
Looks like he was speaking completely hypothetically there. Doesn't seem like you quite fairly represented his viewpoint. Also, I like how in the original, right after he says you might find a signature of some sort of designer, Dawkins is clearly still talking, but Ben Stein cuts him off with voiceover, so you don't hear what he might have said that contradicts what Ben Stein is saying.
So, is DNA proof of God?
Only if you're willing to admit that God is a horrible programmer.
Yes, it is.
Got it. God sucks at programming. So much for omnipotence and omniscience. Alright, that's it for today. Now, Deconverted Man would like to add his 2 cents, so here he is.
I stopped counting the logical fallacies when it became apparent that it was just going to be the same 2 fallacies over and over again. Cherry picking and equivocation. Taking the natural language that the scientists are using and trying to make it say and mean something else. And taking it away from the full context in order to make the case that you want to make. No to all of that. Now, I understand that some people want to say, well, God started the whole thing. It's kind of a God of the gaps, in my view. But, okay, I guess. I mean, you shouldn't do that, but if you really need to do that, and you need to wedge God in that little gap, then okay. Just know that eventually we're going to figure that out, and God's not going to be needed anymore. But don't you dare take what scientists and communicators of science have said out of context and use the natural language that they are using to try to mean something else. DNA formed over a long period of time and did so with, as far as we can tell, no intelligence required. The guiding force, if any, is the fact that life will continue and death will stop. So if something works, then that will continue. And if something didn't work, well, it might continue, but it won't continue as well as the one that would. And what you get with that filtering mechanism over time is a process that results in something useful continuously so. DNA is not perfect, though. Far from it. There's many errors that can crop up in it. But these chemicals don't know what they're doing. They don't know that this is useful. It's just that life, well, found a way, if you will. But that's not to imply any intelligent intervention or interference at any point in time. Well, we can do that now. We can take bananas and we can make them be how we want them to be. And we could even do that with animals and people if we want to. But before we knew how to mess with this stuff and breed selectively and put controls upon and pressures upon the process, it was completely random and guided, if anything, by nature. And nature didn't know that it was guiding at all. It's just some places are hot, so that means you need to do X, Y, and Z to survive. Some places are cold, so you need to do A, B, and C to survive. And if you don't, then you don't survive. And so the genes don't make it. The sequence of DNA is not this programming code like they want you to think it is. And if they really want to make that case, then just show the thing that made all of that. Where is that? Why doesn't it say somewhere made by God or something? Wouldn't you put your signature on something that you worked hard on? I mean, when you open a computer, you can even see the chips sometimes are labeled Intel inside. Why wouldn't God do that? And then, of course, the problem is that God is so much more complex than a human. Then you would have this infinite regress of, well, then who designed the designer? But of course, well, nobody did. Why not? Well, because that would ruin our argument. Yeah, exactly. So, cherry picking and abuse of equivocation is all that the original video has to offer. There's no logical argument there. Certainly not anything that we could actually test in regards to how to discover if this was actually done by some intelligent force or not. Evidence? No. You don't have that because you had cherry picking throughout. So we don't have empirical evidence, a repeatable test, or a valid and sound argumentation. And until we do, we must continue to be skeptical of the conclusions.
Thanks to all my patrons on Patreon. Feel free to support me there if you like. And thanks to Deconverted Man for putting me onto this video and for adding his 2 cents there at the end. See you next time.